Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jo Bartlett. I'm here tonight with the wonderful Jessica Redland, and we're here really to celebrate the release of Jessica's latest novel, Snowflakes Over the Starfish Cafe. I'll just very briefly introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm published by Boldwood Books alongside Jessica, and but really tonight's all about her. So I'm going to hand over to Jessica first and let her tell you a little bit about her background, in case any of you surprisingly don't know who she is already.
Oh, bless you. Thank you, Jo. So I'm Jessica Redland, and I write uplifting but often emotional stories of love, friendship, family and community set in Yorkshire. And I have two main settings for all of my books. They're either set in Whitsborough Bay or they're set in Hedgehog Hollow on the Yorkshire Wolds. And Whitsborough Bay is predominantly modelled on Scarborough, where I live, with a little bit of Whitby, Robin Hood's Bay thrown in just to mix it up a bit. And last week, on Tuesday, it was publication day for Snowflakes Over the Starfish Cafe, which is my 13th novel, all of which have been published from Boldwood Books. So very exciting. 13 and lucky for some, but hopefully not.
Definitely lucky. I mean, I was lucky enough to read an advance copy, and as you know, I absolutely loved it. It's been brilliant. Although we're a little bit late with the publication day celebration. I think it was would be a week tomorrow, won't it, that it was out?
Yeah, I was on holiday, so I completely threw it all out. So
it's been absolutely fantastic to see it flying up the chart. It's in 3 bestseller categories on Amazon already, which is brilliant, and it's garnering fantastic 5-star reviews, as all your books do. I was particularly thrilled to be back in Whitsborough Bay because as much as I love Hedgehog Hollow, for me, knowing your writing journey from the beginning, Whitsborough Bay feels a bit like coming home to me as well. So it's been really nice to be back there. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the novel? Maybe starting off with a bit about the novel in general, what it's about, and what readers who haven't picked it up yet can expect from it.
Yeah, it's a dual point of view story. So it's told from the perspective of our heroine Holly and our hero Jake. And at the beginning of the book, they don't know each other at all. This is something I've done once before in All You Need Is Love as well, where I have a male and a female protagonist. They don't know each other, but at a certain point in the book, their lives collide. Very much a story of two people who have lost the people that they love in their lives. And the result of losing those people has resulted in walls being built up. You know, if the people that you absolutely love so much can be taken away, is it easier to protect yourself by not falling in love with anybody else that you come across, not getting too involved with anybody? Now, Holly runs a cafe that her mum set up, the name of the book being the Starfish Cafe, and that's perched on a cliff top just a couple of miles outside Whitsborough Bay. And the book starts with her putting, or at least the book, when they join together, there's a bit of backstory to get readers into the story. But when they first meet, she's putting up the Christmas tree on bonfire night, and Jake is on the beach taking photos of the town's firework display. And he comes across a lost dog, and you can see the dog just...
I fell in love with the dog. The dog was so gorgeous.
It's lovely. I've always wanted, the dog is a Shih Tzu. I've always wanted a Shih Tzu. I lost that fight when we got a dog. We've got a Sprocker Spaniel instead. But Shih Tzus look like teddy bears as far as I'm concerned. I call them, I don't call them Shih Tzus, I call them bear dogs. And I get excited anytime I see one. I just want to give it a cuddle. So the dog in the story is a bear dog, Shih Tzu. And their worlds connect when Jake catches the dog and calls in the cafe to see whether it might be Holly's. And a friendship builds as a result of a connection with the dog. But the story is all about, can they take that next step? Can they be brave enough?
It does. I mean, and it's a beautiful, emotional story. And I'm guessing, it was a heartfelt read for me. It took me on a roller coaster ride of emotions, as you know, and I cried for all the good reasons. But I know it took you longer to write this book. You started it originally 4 years ago, but it's kind of been. What was the reasons behind that? Was it because it was such an emotional thing to write as well, or were there other factors at play?
Yeah, it was actually something I started to write. As I say, 4 years ago, it was planned to be a Christmas novella for 2017. So my aim had been, I was first published in 2015, had a couple of books came out in 2016, and then I went indie when my publisher ceased trading. And I wanted to, inspired by the success that you had with a Christmas book the year before, I thought, I'd like a bit of that. Christmas books are becoming increasingly popular every year. I'll I'll write a Christmas novella, and specifically wanted it to be a novella to make it kind of a nice, festive, quick read. And I did a load of research for it and started writing it, and it became quite apparent that it couldn't be a novella because I needed it to be a two-perspective story. There were 2 points of view that I needed to tell, and it was going to be way too big to be a novella as a result of that. So I parked it, always intending to come back to it. I then wrote and issued that year what is now Christmas Wishes at the Chocolate Shop and Christmas Valley's Cupcakes, although ironically neither of them ended up being novellas either. I can't do it.
No, you need to give up on that one now, Jessica. The novellas probably.
How many times have I tried that, Jo? And even the one time I managed a novella, I ended up writing a sequel to it that made it a full-length novel. So.
Just too many stories for you to tell, that's what it is. And I'm sure your readers appreciate that they don't end up as novellas, because I don't know if you can see all the comments coming up at the side here saying how much everyone who's read the book is loving it so far. So I think everyone's very glad that it's not a novella. And just to kind of interject before you carry on, just to say if anyone's got any questions for Jessica about the book or anything else, do please pop them into the comments and we'll fit them into the chat tonight. Sorry, I'll let you carry on now.
Thank you. So a little bit more about the story. So the plan was it wasn't going to be a novella, so I parked it, and then I said two Christmas books that year. I then wrote another Christmas book the following year. Again, was meant to be a novella. It didn't end up being a novella. And then just this year, it felt that the time was right to come back and revisit this. And actually, I'm really glad that happened, because as I've written all my books over time, my writing has developed. I mean, I think pretty much every author will say that as they look back through their backlist, their writing has developed as they've gone through. And the type of stories that I like to tell have developed as well. And I've been in a very unique situation that I've been able to go back in and rewrite parts of my entire backlist. So there's nothing that isn't really in a me style anymore. But my more recent books tend to be a little bit more emotional. And I don't think this would have been anywhere near as good a book as it is now. Gosh, that sounds big-headed, doesn't it? But
no, not at all. I mean, you've worked hard on your craft. I mean, you've done a master's and everything in that time, haven't you? So it's been quite a journey for you.
Yeah, so and I've learned from doing my masters so much about kind of putting more emotion in, and the work that I do with my amazing editor Nia. I just think if this had been something written back in 2017, it wouldn't have packed the emotional punch it does now. I don't think all the dots would have been as effectively joined. And in fact, when I did write it, I had to do a complete rewrite because I still was thinking too big, and I ended up having two stories in one and not doing justice to each of them. And I knew there was something not quite right with it. And so Nia was able to kind of pinpoint what that was, which is why we then have a sequel coming up.
Yes, I'm excited. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that, because I'm very pleased to hear that there'll be a sequel to it and a series coming from it. One of the things I loved about the book were the links with the RNLI. And you could see that you'd researched that, really in depth. It was really sort of, it was sort of really clearly written that you had a really good understanding of it, and it's important to the plot line. I don't want to say too much not to give it away to people who haven't read it yet, but obviously it's quite central. Can you tell me a bit about that? And I gather that also there's some of your royalties are going to be donated from this book. Is that right, to the RNLI?
Yeah. So the RNLI. It just, as soon as the story idea popped into my head, it was important to me that there was a connection. And again, thank you for not saying what that specific connection is. I mentioned quite a few times there is a connection to the RNLI, but I don't say what it is because that's part of the story that does need to unfold.
Yeah,
a bit of a spoiler with it. I've lived on the coast for 17 years now, and but I was brought up before that fairly near to the coast as well. So all of my life, I've been very aware of how dangerous, how powerful the sea is, how unpredictable it is, how amazing it is, how beautiful it is. But a lot of people just think, oh, it's just a sea, it'll be all right. And it won't, because even on a calm day, there can be currents, rip tides, all sorts of dangers there. When I was much younger and I learned to swim, I then stopped doing swimming lessons and moved on to life-saving classes and learned how to properly swim in my pajamas, as you do, and how to make a float out of my pajama bottoms, and resuscitation on your little life dummy and everything like that. And that kind of has always stuck in my head, that life-saving and the power of that. And actually, when I was about 16, I was on holiday with a friend of mine, and she's not a strong swimmer, and she got into difficulties in the sea, and I actually did have to use my skills at towing her back to the shore, which was a pretty scary moment for both of us.
Yeah.
It just shows how important these things are. There's a lifeboat station in Scarborough, quite a big one, and I used to be a brown owl until something had to give, and I did my masters and I stopped leading brownies. But I did that for 7.5 years, and 2 or 3 times during my tenure, I took the brownies to the lifeboat station, had a tour around, and it was really on that last time I thought, you know, I want to set a story that has a link here. So I got in touch with the lifeboat station and said, could I come and not have a tour, because I've done that already, but could I spend some time chatting to maybe one of the younger crew members to just really get a feel for that. And I was introduced to a really nice guy called Matt, who he's about the age profile of my character connected to this. And it just gave me so much insight into the motivation of someone who would become lifeboat crew, the impact it has on your life, the community that you get. And of course, we always become very aware living on the coast of some of the amazing, but also some of the tragic scenarios that happen. And a couple of those are nodded to in my book, slightly different scenario, but a couple of the things where I talk about some RNLI rescues or non-rescues, they did really happen on the Yorkshire coast. And also lots of research with the Watching the Amazing Saving Lives at Sea, which is a season 6 back on our TVs now on a Tuesday night, so love that. And also read the fabulous book that they've got out. I'm going to forget the title. You could probably help me with this, Jo. I know you've read it as well.
I do not.
The Storm, something.
I'm looking at it, haven't we? We both read it. Neither of us can remember the title. But what we do is pop it up in the comments afterwards.
Something like Surviving the Storm, or something to do with storms. But it's written by the RNLA about some of the.
It's a great book. So I read it as well, and there was actually a rescue of a lady expecting a baby in there, which I kind of drew some inspiration on for one of my Midwife's 4 book that's coming up in January. So that'll appear then as well. But they're really inspirational stories, and the kind of selflessness of the people who work there is incredible, isn't it? You know, because they're doing it entirely sort of voluntarily, and it's you know, a huge risk and a huge sacrifice to make. So but
they talk about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, which is something a couple of times in my book, and that really is the case.
And I think the book really sort of tells that story about you know, without giving too much away, that it is really and actually sometimes the people don't realize how extraordinary they are. I think that's kind of central theme to the story as well. As you know, I described it as heartbreakingly moving and yet beautifully uplifting, and that's what I loved about it. There were bits that were, you know, difficult and sad and tragic within the story, but ultimately by the end of the novel you feel uplifted, and you know, your hope is paramount, I think, in that, which was really lovely to read. And it was so real because of that. Not everything's perfect for every character. There were things that, you know, don't get perfectly resolved and neatly tied up in a bow, because that's not real life. You know, yet they sort of resolved a lot of their issues, but some things, you know, family dynamics and stuff, again, without giving too much away, can't always be resolved perfectly, can they, as people probably know from their own families. So in terms of the series, will it feature the 2 lead characters again? And I'm not going to name them both either, because obviously we know Holly's the lead protagonist, but I won't name the other lead character in case it gives too much away. But also, will it feature them again, or will it feature other characters? And are you intending to write more kind of emotional storylines? Have you got ideas yet of how that's going to go?
Yeah, so the next one will be out probably April next year, and it will be, in fact, I've even confirmed a title this morning, and I'm going to be really sneaky, and I don't know if I'm ready to reveal it, but it may change, but we don't think it will. It's going to be Summer Nights at the Starfish Cafe, and but don't tell Nia if I wasn't meant to say that.
It is an exclusive. I like this. It's good.
Exclusive for you all today. And so that'll probably be out around about April, and it will be at the Starfish Cafe. Holly will be a main narrator in it, but the second point of view will be another female character who we haven't met yet, and is a brand new character coming into the book. I won't explain how she comes in. Now, unlike my Hedgehog Hollow series, where I've had an increasingly cheeky cliffhanger at the end of each one just to entice somebody into reading the next one and to give them a flavour for what's coming, there is no cliffhanger at the end of Snowflakes Over the Starfish Cafe. It is a complete story. It gets to kind of a happy ending, but I just felt it was such a gorgeous setting. And as I said, when I originally wrote it, there was sort of 2 books in one. The story we took out becomes the main focus from Holly's perspective of what happens in book 2, but I'm not going to say anything more about that. It's a little bit different to anything I've written. It's something I've again really enjoyed researching, and so it will be continuation of what's happening at Starfish Cafe with her, more customers, and the storyline that came out the first one, and then the second character whose life will become intertwined with Holly's. And I just realised as well that I didn't finish. You asked me about royalties and information. So what I'm doing is it gets apparently really, really complicated from a tax point of view and a paperwork point of view. If you say I'm giving royalties or direct and sales proceeds, that's not what I'm doing. What I am doing is I am supporting the RNLI at Scarborough as a charity this year, and I'm going to make a donation to them. And so and I specifically wanted to make it Scarborough because Scarborough has helped me out, and that is my hometown. But there is a link in the back of the book, and a link did just flash on the screen a little while ago. If anybody does want to donate, it's back up again. Thank you. If anybody does want to donate to such an amazing cause, whether you live near the sea or not, and of course there's other waters that they cover, and there's a permanent crew on the River Thames that are based there as well, and by some kind of a couple of big reservoirs or lakes, I think, have crews. It's not just the coastline. Brilliant. But predominantly made up from volunteers, which just never ceases to amaze me.
No, absolutely. No, with the risks they take and everything else, it's incredible. There's been a few comments popping up. Lots of people absolutely loving the book, as I said, saying what great characters the 2 lead characters are. And Josie saying she particularly loves the puppy. I think we all do. And was asking about, Josie was also asking about a sequel. I think you've answered that one. Jessica Benge, I hope I'm pronouncing your surname right, Jessica, is asking how you came up with one of my favourite characters too, which is Mrs. Sultana. Do you want to say a little bit about the inspiration for Mrs. Sultana was?
Okay, so Mrs. Sultana, without it's not a spoiler to give this away. It's just a fun part of the story if you haven't read it. One of the things that we wanted to do was have some interesting characters in the cafe, and there's a particular lady, an elderly lady, who comes in and has been coming in for a long time, pretty regularly, but she never engages with any of the staff members. And they've asked her several times what her name is and tried to have a conversation, but she just sits and gazes out the window. And she always sits at a window seat, and she always orders a pot of tea and a fruit scone. Nothing unusual about that, except she then proceeds to pick all the sultanas out of the fruit scone, and they keep offering her, would you like a plain scone as well? Because they do plain scones, but no, she always wants this fruit scone. And the idea just popped into my head because it's something I do, and I know you do as well, Jo. Yeah. We don't like fruit scones.
It's an abomination, in my opinion. I think there's something very weird about ordering a fruit scone myself, but
So when I have one, I will never choose a fruit scone. I don't mind when I don't mind eating a bit of fruit, but I don't like it when it's overloaded. So all the ones around the edge and all the ones I can see, I will pick out and end up with this little pile on my plate. And so they do ultimately get to know her, and they do this. I won't give away the story as to why she does remove the sultanas, but it's quite a nice little story.
It's such a lovely, heartwarming little story. It's really not. I mean, it kind of sums up the book to me. There's kind of characters, and a lot of people are putting in the comments how they feel at home in your books and in the community straight away, and they feel like they could go into the cafe and have a cup of tea with Mrs. Sultana, and also you see Mr. Pickles is obviously hugely popular as well. But I think it's that sense of community and that sense that particularly in the times at the moment when people want to escape maybe from their own everyday, that you can feel like you can go to this place and have that sort of warmth and that community feel. And I think and Mrs. Sultana is a perfect example of that. And as Jessica knows, I recently went down to the Jane Austen Cafe in Bath and forgot to tell them that I didn't like fruit scones, and they gave me one plain and one fruit, so I had to send her a picture of me picking out.
I love that.
That I was doing a Mrs. Sultana, so I think it's going to come into the language that now, because it's something that I think a number of us will do. So I think the characters are really lovely, and it is. If you haven't already read it, I can't recommend it enough. It is an absolutely beautiful story. And if you haven't noticed already, Jessica's wearing a dress today with starfish on. So if you can't see, I don't know if it's big enough for people to see if you get close to the camera. And because Jessica's always so organised with things like that, I had to raid my wardrobe and try and find something. So I've got love hearts on my. That's the closest I get for love stories. So it is a really lovely story, and people are saying how much they're loving it. And I think everyone's really glad to hear it's part of the series. So
thank you. No, living it. I'm laughing as well. Claire has put fruit scones are a big part of my identity. Feels slightly offended. Sorry to anybody who adores fruit scones.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but you're weird. And we won't get into the scone debate, otherwise we'll be.
Oh yeah, you'll notice Jo and I pronounce that differently.
We've been friends for a long time. Let's not fall out over that debate again. I know Sharon's with me if she's out there. She knows how to say it.
It's scone.
It's cone with an S on the end. It's scone. Come on. Let's not go there.
Oh dear.
So we're going to talk a little bit really about how some of the storylines are generated, not just in Snowflakes over the Starfish Cafe, but generally kind of character arcs and stuff like that. And one of the podcasts I really like, which I've been talking to Jessica about, is, I don't know if anyone else out there has listened to it, it's How to Fail, which is Elizabeth Day. And it's kind of talking a little bit about asking celebrities and other notable people to come in and talk about how their failures have helped them kind of become successful, and how they've learned from those failures over time, and really develop their own character arcs, if you like, in their own lives, and use that sort of learn as a learning process. Really, it's a bit like maybe one of those cheesy kind of things that you can put up that says, every failure is a chance to learn or something. But I think that really is true, and I think we found that in our characters. So, did you want to talk a little bit, Jessica, about how that kind of informed, particularly the storyline for your latest novel, but generally in your writing, how you've used that to kind of develop a character arc for some of your storylines?
Yeah, I think the genre we write in general does lend itself to having a scenario where something has gone wrong, there has been some sort of failure, some sort of breakdown. And so for me in Snowflakes at Starfish Cafe, for Holly, since she had a tragedy in her life, she's completely focused on the cafe. She's built her entire existence around the cafe, around the staff, around the customers. She also has the thing that she does. She has a woodworking side of her business. She does some crafting. And that takes up any time she's not in the cafe. So she goes beach combing for driftwood, and she then spends time in a workshop making her driftwood creations. And as a result, she's not made any new friendships. She's been closed off to letting love in. And Jake has also, again, as a result of what's happened in his past, he's shut everybody out. He doesn't really have any friends. He doesn't have girlfriends, because he just doesn't want to talk about what happened. As soon as he starts sharing an element of his life, there's going to be questions, and he doesn't want to answer those questions. Yeah. And they have so much in common. But I didn't want their tragic backgrounds to be the sole reason they get together. So the way they did start getting to know each other is through the dog. And when they start looking at potentially that being a romantic relationship, they haven't shared their pasts. And so actually they get to know the person first about the baggage. And that was a really important part, that it wasn't just, oh, well, two damaged souls will get together because they are two damaged souls, and who else would they be with? It's actually that they find other connections, and then perhaps when they do find out about each other's pasts, that's what kind of really cements the relationship and gets that much deeper understanding that they have. But I think, starting from a failure point of view, is just such a great way to take a story. And I'm going to switch the question back on you now, because we haven't talked about the fact that you've had 2 new releases came out the day before mine, with A Cornish Summer's Kiss and Second Chances at Cherry Tree Cottage. I can't speak today. I'll start that one again. Second Chances at Cherry Tree Cottage. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about that, and then lead into the kind of the...
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to talk briefly about this. I mean, to me, it's your night tonight, so I'm not going to spend a long time talking about this. But there are 2 actually re-releases that were previously independently published, but then I've been with the brilliant Boldwood Books and had a bit of a revamp, got beautiful new covers, which I'm absolutely delighted with. One is set, as the title gives away, A Cornish Summer's Kiss in Cornwall. And for anyone who's read any of the midwife's books, it's a neighbouring village of Portcara where that's set. And talking about the potential this morning of maybe a spin-off series from there, so that will be quite nice. But it tells the story of Lexi, who has lost her husband in an accident. So there's some similar themes, I guess, with Snowflakes Over the Starfish Cafe, about the grief that she feels, and she's having real problems letting go of not just the grief, but also blaming other people for the accident, people she holds responsible for the accident that happened. And because she can't let go of that bitterness, she's not moving on with her own life. So she's kind of stuck still at the beginning of those grief phases that sort of people talk about moving through. So she decides to visit a place, Portcara, and a cottage that's cut off by high tide, to be alone with herself and Albie, her lovely Labrador, who gets into all sorts of trouble, to kind of just try and make a fresh start and try and be ready to move on with her life. So again, she's coming from a point of failure, I guess, of failure to move on, and it's about second chances and restarting. But she finds it quite difficult because she bumps into somebody who she holds responsible for her husband's accident, which again sends her spiraling backwards. And she takes a job to kind of help her move forwards. But her new boss engages in the same kind of high risk sport that her husband lost his life in, so it's quite difficult for her to move past all of that. So really the story tells about her battle to get past all of those things and move on, and learn from those failures and learn new behaviours and new ways of living without Finn, really. And then Second Chances at Cherry Tree Cottage is again kind of Second Chances gives you a bit of a clue. That's Scarlett's story, and it's my first book with Boldwood set in Kent, which is quite nice to go to my home territory, sort of Darling Buds of May country, which is a beautiful place for Scarlett to go home to. But she's going home after her husband Luke completely disappears off the face of the earth, leaving her and her daughter Ava to start a new life. And she most feels a failure about failing to give her the stable family that she wanted to. She goes back to the village where she grew up, where everybody knows what happens, and she feels like the talk of the village. And there are a few gossips and a few mums at the school gate. If anyone's watched Motherland, there's a few of those types of characters at the school gate who quite enjoy Scarlett's failure, if you want to call it that, and making her feel like a failure. So again, she kind of has to get over that, move forward and find a new way of living for herself and Ava, and come to terms with what's happened and realise actually that from what it seemed a failure, you can actually realise it was the best thing that could possibly happen. And hopefully if you read Scarlett's story, you'll see that's the journey she goes on. So yeah, so again,
both fabulous books. I mean, I've read absolutely everything Jo has written. Jo's read all of my books, and because we've been friends for about 9 years. 9 years, yeah, 9 years,
yeah,
and it's they're both so lovely, and great heroines, great heroes who you fall in love with all of your heroes, Jo. They're fabulous. And I'm a bit of a sucker for a returning to the roots story. Yeah. I love that, going back to the place that you left, and that cringe moment of don't really want to be here, or perhaps I'm embarrassed to be here because everybody knows what's happened, and they're both just such gorgeous, such fabulous stories. And so if you haven't read them, do read them now. You're all in for an absolute treat with those.
Thank you, that's lovely. So as I think I promised in a bit of the promo I did, I promised that we'd talk about our own failures.
Yes.
And I think when we were talking about them beforehand, there's a bit of a theme emerging in some of them. So just how much we divulge in this. But in the podcast, what Elizabeth Day asked people to come and talk about what they consider to be their 3 greatest failures. And I use greatest in both senses of the words, could be biggest, but also greatest in terms of how much they've learned from them. And how that's changed the course of their life, so that it can make you realise that, you know, whatever happens, whatever seems like a closed door or the end of something, that actually can be the beginning of something else. So, Jessica, would you like to share with us what you feel your 3 greatest failures are and how they have actually influenced your life as it is now?
Yeah, I mean, when when Jo suggested talking about what was in this podcast, I absolutely loved the idea behind it, because I'm a great believer in the everything happens for a reason idea, and a lot of the, if you want to call them failures or the disasters in your life or whatever, when you do learn from them, often they have happened for something better to unfold. And we find that, as you were just talking about with your heroine there. So my 3 failures I narrowed down. 2 of them are related to the same thing, but it had a different impact. At the late 80s, not at all, late 90s, early noughties, I was in a relationship that really I should have not let become a relationship, and certainly shouldn't have let it drag on to the point that we bought a house together and we stayed together for 2 years. And from the beginning, I knew it wasn't right, but just there was a point in my life where I didn't want to be alone. And I think that is something that quite often people can relate to. Sometimes the idea of being in a relationship that isn't great, and we're not talking an abusive relationship or anything like that, but being in a relationship that isn't great feels better than being on your own because of what else is going on in your life, perhaps where you live, what's going on at work and everything.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of a massive coincidence about how we met. And if anybody has read New Beginnings at Seaside Blooms, how Sarah meets Jason, who she splits up with near the beginning of the book, that's pretty much what happened to me and my ex. And it was a bad relationship. I put in a lot of weight that I've never kind of recovered from as a result of that relationship. It did affect me massively, mentally, financially, emotionally. But if I hadn't been in that relationship, I would never have met a friend of his, a female friend, who, at the point that we had split up and the house was on the market and I was trying to decide whether to stay in Reading, where I was living at the time, or do something completely different with my life, move back up to the north where I was from, his friend gave me a gift voucher for a telephone clairvoyant, something I'm not really into, something I would never have thought of phoning up, but I just thought, you know what, I've got a gift voucher, what the heck. And I phoned up this clairvoyant, and she told me that I was going to move back up to the north. I hadn't said anything about this, that I was going to open a shop again. I hadn't said that that was something I was going to do, but I was toying with opening a teddy bear shop. And she told me that when I did move back up to the north, I would meet the man of my dreams, and he would be called Stephen. I didn't meet Stephen. I did meet the man of my dreams, but he's called Mark. But that gave me an idea for a book. And before it got re-edited with Boldwood, that book, New Beginnings at Seaside Blooms, was called Searching for Stephen. And the premise all being about what would happen if somebody has uncovered an old clairvoyant prediction and becomes a bit obsessed that they're going to meet Stephen. But they close their eyes to everybody around them who doesn't have that name. So I got my premise for a first book. Now, also related to the bad relationship, I have loved since I was about early teens teddy bears. Absolutely adore teddy bears. The proper name for a collector or lover of bears is an arctophile. I am an arctophile. But I didn't know back then, when I was in this relationship, that collectible bears existed. I'd sort of heard of Steiff. I mean, most people have heard of Steiff, but I'd never been in a proper collectible bear shop. And he took me to a bear shop in his hometown when we went to visit his parents one weekend. And after I'd picked myself up off the floor at the shock of the price tag on the first one that I looked at, I became absolutely hooked. Bought my first collectible bear, and that was when I made the decision to that I would really like to open a bear shop. That is then what I did when I moved back up to north to the north. And when I opened the bear shop, I was in my very early 30s, and I thought, you know what, I would love to meet somebody. I would like to get married, have children, and there's no way I'm going to meet somebody when I own a teddy bear shop, because any men who come into the shop are going to be buying bears for their children, their wives, girlfriends, fiancés, whatever. It's kind of not exactly a great place for meeting somebody.
No.
And I enrolled in online dating, and my husband Mark was the first person who contacted me as soon as I'd enrolled. And one of the things that appealed to me, I didn't say I ran a teddy bear shop because I thought that might really put some people off. But I said I ran my own business, and Mark was self-employed, and he very much understood that you can work some really erratic hours, you can have ups and downs with businesses. So the fact that I ran my own business appealed to him. He got in touch with me. We met a few days later and got engaged, got married. But in the early days, he encouraged me to take my writing seriously. He got me to enroll in the Writers' Bureau. I got some feedback saying actually I had a bit of a gift for being able to tell a story. And because he came from Scarborough, I was writing a story that had a bit of a northern setting. I had no setting really. And I went to visit him in Scarborough, and kind of as soon as I visited, I thought, this is where I need to set my story. I'd been a couple of times in childhood, but I hadn't really paid much attention to it. So without him, I wouldn't have discovered I could write, wouldn't have discovered Whitsunther Bay, moved here, ultimately Hedgehog Hollow. And then my third one is that I completely failed as an indie author. When my first publisher went bust, I got my rights back, released several more books, and some books take off and some books don't, and there's never any particular rhyme or reason for it. And it didn't work for me. But trying to do that alongside a day job as a very demanding day job, working lots of hours, 7 days a week, I couldn't invest the time and the energy in learning how to promote and doing all the promotion. Otherwise I would never have written any books. And I knew I couldn't keep going writing these books that not enough people were reading, only selling a couple of ebooks a day, if I was lucky, days in a row of no sales at all. And I knew I was going to have to go with a publisher. And I sent off a story that at the time was called Wish I Could Tell You Goodbye, sent it off to a few publishers. I got rejections, and they absolutely floored me, because at that point, that was my 9th book I'd written. And the feedback I'd had on others was that they were good, but you're not getting anywhere. And I came really, really close to giving up, thinking, what is the point in all this? I don't spend time with my family because all I'm doing is working or writing. And then I saw an advert for Ballswood Books and thought, you know what, one more submission. On the day that they opened, I submitted, and that book became The Secret to Happiness, my first book that came out almost exactly 2 years ago. And the rest is history. Completely changed my life. But all of those 3 things are directly related to my marriage and relationship as it is now, me being a writer, me being a full-time writer, and they're all on the back of some of the biggest failures and the most down moments in my life. But gosh, everything happens for a reason, and these things have made me who I am today.
Yeah, and I think if you hadn't had those experiences, you might not have seized those opportunities when they came along, might you? Because you would have just, you would have been coming to things with a different mindset, or you wouldn't have logged on at that particular time that Mark did as well. And it's all just a bit of serendipity there, which I think I agree with you. I think as novelists who write about romance, we have to believe in that kind of serendipity, don't we? And that sort of
believe
those chances.
Yeah, and I think that having gone through sort of failures. Quite often you might get asked how you can have characters and really describe something that you've not been through yourself, but describe it so well and understand. And I think it's if you've had those feelings in relation to something completely different, a different scenario, you can still apply them to how another scenario might feel. So, for example, I've not been divorced, but I could apply the feelings of a bad relationship into how I might feel if I was divorced. I haven't lost parents, but I can relate other bad times in my life to how I might feel if I was in a bereavement scenario. So you just take that and you inject it in your writing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. No,
so what about you too, Jo? Same question to you. If you were a guest on the How to Fail podcast.
Unlike you, I have been divorced. So that's probably, when we were talking about this, is kind of but I wouldn't call it, I actually probably wouldn't call it a bad relationship. It was a failed relationship. We were together 12 years and just ultimately realised we didn't have the same values really in terms of family life and how central that was to who we were. So I don't regret any of it because I got my beautiful daughter from that marriage. And I also learned what I really wanted from a relationship from that. So when I was sort of deciding I'd like to meet somebody else, I kind of was talking to my mum, and I was making a list. This was long before you kind of made these lists to the universe that they do now, of all the things you want, where you kind of you speak to the universe. But I made this list of what I wanted. I wanted someone very family orientated. I wanted somebody who was a bit good at DIY and things, because my first husband didn't really do anything in the house and stuff like that. So, but most importantly, somebody who wanted to spend their spare time with the family and had that kind of same sort of mindset as me. And that's absolutely what I found in my second husband. So really I learned from that third relationship what was important to me. And that's what I was seeking, and luckily enough found, which is brilliant. And like you with Mark, Lloyd absolutely supported my writing. I couldn't do it if I was working full time as a senior manager at a college when I started writing. And sort of even after that, I was balancing university lecturing still up until just about thinking about finishing that altogether now. But I've had to balance those two things, and family life. And like you, I did a master's, but mine was in education as well, in amongst all of this stuff. And if he wasn't absolutely so brilliant, it didn't show up every day for the family and be there for what we need, I couldn't have done any of it. I probably still wouldn't have written that first book. So I'm hugely grateful for that happening. And my first husband's really happy with his new partner, and we all get on great. So that's just it's positive from that respect. But a bit like Scarlett, I guess, in Second Chances at Cherry Tree Cottage, I did feel like I'd failed my daughter at that stage. She was only a year old, and I thought, I've left her in this sort of broken family situation. But now she's got, I've got a son with my second husband, who they fight sometimes, but they love each other to death. And I've got two stepchildren, and they all get on brilliantly. So I don't think we change any of that for the world, really. So, as you say, things are meant to be sometimes. And I guess, again, it feeds into the my second failure, which is kind of beyond my control. But my body failed me because I got kidney cancer when I was 39. And it was a hugely scary time. My son was 5, my daughter was 8, and I was reading them stories at night, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to be doing that, and who was going to be reading them those stories. And it just changed everything, my mindset totally. I was working, as I say, as a manager at a college, doing sort of far more hours than I should be for the contract I had. I think the week before I got my diagnosis, I'd done 39 hours overtime for Ofsted, missing sports days and those kind of things. And when it happened, I just said, this is it. I'm going to take the leap. I'm going to go freelance. So I became a freelance uni lecturer, and that enabled me to have some time to write. And that's was when I wrote my first book, which everything has grown off the back of there. So although it was a failure I couldn't control, I felt like my body had let me down. And I wasn't one of these really brave people who said, oh, I never said why me. I did say why me. I thought, why did it happen to me, and why this, and why, and how can it happen to me? I've got these little kids, and I can't bear the thought of leaving them behind. But even that situation, which was horrific at the time, I'm glad it happened now, because it's changed, where I prioritise my family, how we do things, how my career has panned out. And it's made me think differently about, what's important and what's seizing the day, really. And my final failure is one I'm still working on, which again kind of comes off the back of that. And that's really sort of appreciating. I'm not very good at appreciating how I've achieved or what I've done. I keep thinking, when I've done this, that'll be great. So if I have a book, I was really lucky that the first Cornish Midwife's book made it into the top 10. I thought, when I've done that, that'll be it. I won't need to kind of strive for the next thing. But my mindset is not really wired that way. So I'm always striving for the next thing. So my goal really is to overcome that failure and to live a little bit more in the moment and appreciate the things that do happen, rather than always thinking about what's next. So that's a failure I'm still working on. But I think, the first step to addressing any shortfall is recognizing that it's a problem or a shortfall, really, isn't it? And so I know that's an area that I've got to work on. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to come back in the future and say I've cracked that one. Crack that one as well.
And I can completely relate to that one, because I once, a while ago, before either of us joined Boldwood, I remember writing a poem that I put on a blog post all about how the goalposts keep shifting. And at first it starts off with wondering if we can even write a book, and then it becomes, we want the book to be picked up and published, and then we want this to happen, and then we want this to happen, and I'm just as bad, aren't I? We often talk about this.
Absolutely, yeah.
We're looking at, but that didn't get to this position, or that didn't sell this, instead of going, oh my goodness, that did this, that's phenomenal, especially compared to where we were before. And
yeah. I think it's human nature to an extent, isn't it, that you kind of doing that. But I think it is something we've probably both got room to get a little bit better at. I'm just going to pick up some of the questions now that are coming in as well, because I don't want to miss those. So Grace has asked, how do you come up with such brilliant storylines? They're all different but equally beautiful and heartwarming. Do you want to say a little bit about your inspiration and how you kind of come up with these things? And I'll just have a scan through some
great
more.
question. Thank you, Grace. Mine just come from all over the place. I mean, the debut one, as I've mentioned, although New Begins at Seaside Blooms is the second book in the series, it was my debut novel. And then Making Wishes at Bayview, which is the first in the series, that was a prequel I wrote afterwards, and then added it into the series. And that came from a real life scenario. Then when I wrote that one, she had two best friends, and suddenly they had stories that needed to be told, and so that kind of just evolved organically, really, with that. The Secret to Happiness came from a song lyric. I just heard of a lyric in a Leona Lewis song where the chorus says, "Wish I could tell you goodbye." It's a song called Unlove Me on her album Glass Heart, if anybody likes Leona Lewis. I love her voice. And it's about wanting somebody to unlove her because she knows she's in a toxic relationship, but she can't let go. She loves the guy so much, she wants him to end it. And I just was, as I was driving to meet my good writing friend Sharon Booth, I was listening to this song and I was thinking, I wonder what other scenarios somebody might not be able to let go of somebody that they need to. And I came up with about 6, narrowed it down to 3, and that's the premise behind The Secret to Happiness. Hedgehog Hollow came from a university assignment. I was asked to put a character in an uncomfortable situation when I was doing my master's in creative writing. And I thought, okay, somebody at a wedding who's a bridesmaid and the groom is somebody they are in love with. That would be an uncomfortable situation. And that became the opening scene for Finding Love at Hedgehog Hollow, where Samantha is, her cousin is marrying Samantha's ex. But the cousin doesn't know that Samantha is in love with the ex still, because she always made out she wasn't bothered. And then my auntie runs a hedgehog rescue centre, so those two things combined. And I could go on and I could give a premise for every single book, and it's all, a combination of things. And I've got a couple of stories that I want to tell in the future that are based around newspaper articles that I've seen, just like human interest stories. And I thought, based upon that tiny premise, I've got an entire story has opened up. And because I write in a couple of settings, as the characters come into the settings or new businesses come in, often they spring up with owners. I mean, Carly's Cupcakes, that was just a shop that was mentioned when I wrote Christmas Wishes at the Chocolate Shop. And then as soon as I mentioned this business over the road that made cupcakes, I thought, oh gosh, Carly has an entire personality in a story. I've got to write her book as well. So yeah, all sorts of things. What about you, Jo? Where do your ideas come from?
Well, people are always telling me, my husband's always says, we're at dinner and he goes like this because he knows that I'm listening to somebody else's conversation behind. So, I now get away with it. People watching and listening into other people's conversations. I say it's research, but I've done it my whole life. My mum said when I was about 3, we were on holiday in Greece. She said, you caught me between this group of women, and I was stuck in the middle of all these women. I was saying to them, how old are you? And all these really little nosy questions. But obviously it was always in there, but now I call it kind of an occupational sort of a need, so I get away with it. I'm just going to grab a few more of the questions. I don't want to miss these. Lovely Mary Grand is with us tonight. Lovely to see you, Mary. Has asked, have you ever wanted to write in another genre?
Yes, several. I'd love to write a historical. I have an idea for a historical, but the problem is I don't know much about history. So although I have to do lots of research for the books that I do, you have to do so much more research for historic. So I might think, I've got a theme in a book. So The Are in a Lie, I've got Parkinson's in another book. So I do that research, but I know how people speak. I know what things cost. I know, all of these things that I just naturally write. If I was to write a historical and it would be World War II that particularly interests me, I'd have so much that I have to research that I could probably write 3 of my normal books for the time it would take for a historical. I'd love to write a psych thriller or 2, and I have an entire series in my head for YA, but not enough hours in the day. But one day, hopefully, would do that.
No, I think I've seen some of yours. I mean, I think I've always thought you'd be brilliant at YA stuff. So I think there's real scope there. It's just like you say, you need to get sort of 36 hours out of every day, don't you? Leslie's asked a brilliant question here. She said, Leslie SG, have you ever read one of your friends' novels and wished you had written it yourself? That happens to me all the time. I have to say, we have a group called the Right Romantics, and there's 10 of us. Almost every time I read one of the others, I wish I'd written it. And sometimes I think, I can't believe I know the person that's written this book. That's when you get kind of a pinch me moment kind of on a secondary basis. So I think, wow, I know this person and they've written this brilliant book. But what about you, Jessica? Do you ever get that feeling?
It would be exactly the same. There's a few friends, so yourself, Sharon Booth, a couple of others. I've read everything that they've written, or I've read most of the things that they've written, and all of them I just love so much. And I could easily go, oh, what a brilliant idea! Oh, I love that. And yeah, could happily have written any of those. But I think that's what's lovely is that you can get several romance authors or women's fiction authors, and you could give them the same subject and even the same characters, same setting, but we'll all write something different and in a different way. And I think although it's more of not oh God, I wish I'd written that story. It's more, oh, I love that. I'd love to have written that. I'd love to have tried that. But I love the way they did it, and I don't think I could do it better. I'd have a different take on it, but yeah, just really enjoyed being able to absorb myself as a reader in that story.
Yeah, I've always wondered whether it might be interesting if you try and do one of those, like you used to when you were a kid and you write a bit of the story each and you see how it together. It might be quite fun. Maybe the short story initially, it might be quite fun to try that and see.
Wait, Jo, who are you talking to? Short story?
Well, your bit would turn it into a novel. I'd send you 2,000 words and it would come back at 20, so that'd be job done, wouldn't it? So I'd get the easy bit, but it fascinates me when you see people writing as a team. How they do that and how it works out, whether there's any conflict or whether it just no. But it'd be quite fun to do it if we had the time. I think, and because I think
it would be great fun.
You and I and Sharon Booth all write sort of comparable books that are quite often compared to one another, kind of warm, community-based feel good. But then we get Helen Pfeiffer in there to do a couple of murders for us in the midst of it all. it would be really good fun, and so I think maybe one day we'll try that. I'm going to pick up another couple of questions because it leads into one of our discussion points. And I think Jessica Fenge was asking, are there any more Whitborough Bay books planned? I know you've talked about the fact there's a sequel to this, but are you going to go back to Castle Street at any point? What's next for you in terms of books beyond?
Yeah, and so obviously this is Whitborough Bay, but it's not on Castle Street, and people are going to really love Castle Street. There's several books that are sat there in different businesses, and I have so many businesses that I would love to explore. I'm still planning to write one. It was going to be next year, but I think it'll probably be the year after, in a cat cafe on Castle Street. And I know what the story is going to be. There is an amazing cat cafe in Scarborough called Steampus Cat Lounge. It's gorgeous. And I really want to write that. I need to write a sequel to Starry Skies Over the Chocolate Pot Cafe as well, because although it didn't end on a cliffhanger, there are a couple of threads in there that I planted for a sequel, and I want to explore those. And there's also lots of other bits of Whitborough Bay that I've not massively explored. I have a river that doesn't exist in Scarborough, but I introduced because the cover of Making Wishes at Bayview had a river, and I just thought, oh, that's gorgeous. Let me make one into Whitborough Bay. And there's lots of businesses around there. There's lots on the seafront, so much. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish Hedgehog Hollow next year. There'll be 3 more Hedgehog Hollow books next year, making it 6 in total. There will be the sequel out for this, and we will continue. There will continue to be Whitborough Bay books in there. There will still be things set in Hedgehog Hollow country. I have a spin-off and I have a prequel planned, but the actual series itself will wrap up in the 6 books at the end of next year. But yeah,
lots to come, lots of exciting, and I think it'll please all your readers and saying, oh, but we've got Tracy saying no, Hedgehog Hollow can't end. Getting very upset at the thought there might only be 3 more stories to come.
It has to. I can't keep disrupting poor Sam's life, and it's one of those things. I need to get to the point where the characters do have a happy ever after, and I think it will just have run its natural course. I'm not saying would never return to it. I would never say never with any of my characters, but it's just at one point.
No, that's brilliant. I think one of the things we were going to talk about as well, if we haven't got very long, only got about sort of 5 minutes left, unfortunately. It's been great. And if we don't get to all the questions tonight, we'll both myself and Jessica will come back and look at the chat later and answer any other questions that have come up or come up if anyone watches the video later on, so we can pick up on those. But we talked a bit about the fact that this season and your sequel to Snowflakes over the Starfish Cafe is going to be your first summer-based story. And with summer in the title officially, but you've got 4 sort of Christmassy winter themed books. Do you have a preference for the seasons you write about, and if so, why is that?
Yeah, it's funny because I hadn't registered that I had no summer books, and then when I looked, I went, "Gosh, no!" And considering that 10 of them are set in a seaside resort, you kind of think summer might have featured in there, but summer doesn't. There are some that happen kind of over a summer period. I've got some that are spread out over longer. I think autumn is actually my favourite season. I love that kind of cold, crisp days but blue skies. I love the colours of the leaves. I love that freshness, that, nights are getting a bit colder. You can wrap up in your woolies and your scarf.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So I think I'm inclined to that warm and cosy, the log fires, bonfire night, Christmas tree going up to autumn as we move into winter. And I think that's just naturally gravitated me towards the Christmas books. And I also think there's just something lovely about books that then take us into New Year, and that kind of New Year, fresh start, new excitement. And so quite a few of mine kind of move into that part of the year as well. But yeah, it was odd that 10 books set by the seaside, none of them about summer.
I know you were saying that summer's not your favourite and how hot it was before we started, but I'm just sad that everyone missed your Beyonce moment in the wind tunnel before it started with your wind blowing in the fan, because it would have been perfect. If we could have captured that on camera, it was a perfect, the rock star moment for you to.
Yeah, only it didn't look quite as glamour. I just had a big strand of hair sticking up here. So yeah. I would like to look good in a wind tunnel, but yeah, it doesn't happen for me, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I'm with you really on the autumn. We might not agree on Scone and Scone, but we can agree on autumn. It's definitely my favourite to write about. But there's something about, I think, for me, I always love the build up to Christmas as well. Perhaps more than the day itself, because it's all the kind of events, and it lends itself to kind of quite heightened storylines as well, doesn't it? That kind of intensity, and the kind of intensity of within the community of everyone sort of, in that situation together and enjoying that build up together. But it could add drama, because when you get families together or relationships together, that's when you can get sort of fireworks and things, and things can come to a head when you're in that kind of close quarters. So I think that's probably part of it as well. But this has been my first year where I haven't written a specific Christmas story, so it's quite weird, because I'm always normally doing that at this time of year in the summer, putting on Christmas films and trying to get into the mood and lighting Yankee candles that smell of mulled wine in the hope that I can kind of channel my inner Christmas spirit. So it's been the first year that I haven't actually done a specific one this year. So
because I was looking, you've got 8 winter or Christmas kind of themed books. So again, it's that lean towards Christmas with your titles, although you do have quite a few summer ones as well.
Yeah, I think the Christmas ones tend to be more themes, I guess, around that. You put a lot of that into it, whereas the summer ones is probably more about the setting, like you say, if they're set by the seaside or what have you, rather than it being sort of specific summer events. But I haven't got anything specifically titled autumn, so maybe that's something for the future. That maybe when we do our joint story, we'll go for an autumn storyline. And Grace wanted to know if you did any cake or scone tasting for when you for your cafe. any additional research?
I didn't, but I'm always up for a bit of cake. I love a bit of cake, love a bit of scone. When I wrote Christmas Wishes at the chocolate shop, I spent a day with a master chocolatier. That was a really hard day of research. That was.
Oh, must have been terrible.
Really tough. Had to sample those, and research, cake, chocolate.
And then Jessica's also asked, have you ever thought about, I know you talked about YA, have you ever thought about doing specifically a children's book?
Gosh, I would love to. The interesting thing about children's book is it's hitting the right age, and I wouldn't want to write the sort that are more illustrated books, because I think there's just so many talented authors doing that already. I did toy at one point with whether to write some children's books which sat alongside Hedgehog Hollow, and a kind of read along with Mum and a simplified version of it, but just wouldn't have had the time to get it out with Hedgehog Hollow. But again, Never say never. It might be something I think of. It might be that there's a spin-off, a toy. You just, when opportunities present themselves, sometimes.
And maybe when you have grandchildren and you're telling those bedtime stories that you're making up, maybe they'll make it onto the page at some point. So that would be lovely, wouldn't it?
Oh,
Well, I think we are coming up to time now. We're almost at an hour. It's been absolutely lovely to chat to you. Thank you everybody who sent in the questions. And as I said, I think I've scrolled through, just had another look. I don't think we've missed any, but we'll come back and pick up any that we haven't. It's been so lovely to see so many nice comments. And Jessica, your books are dearly loved, and everyone's absolutely loving Snowflakes over the Starfish Cafe. So I think it will continue to rise, continue to be flying multiple bestseller flags, and I think those of us who've read it, all really look forward to the sequel. And I, for one, can't wait. The little bit of hold it up there. It's got a beautiful cover as well, hasn't it? Absolutely lovely.
It's so pretty. It's my favourite. Well, I struggled between that one and Christmas Wishes. Absolutely love them. But then also saw the cover for A Wedding at Hedgehog Hollow.
Hedgehog Hollow 4 as well, isn't it? So, well, they all look lovely on the bookshelf together, really. That's what you have to.
Oh, definitely.
No. You can't have one without the other. So thank you so much for the chat tonight. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed it too. It's been really lovely to chat as always. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you everybody. Really appreciate all the love for Starfish Cafe. I've had some amazing comments and appreciate it so much. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for all the lovely comments, and I will go through them. I can smell my tea. I'm having spaghetti bolognese. I'm very excited about that. And, looking forward to that. Great thing is my husband's a chef, so it's wafting up. So I'm off to do that. But then once I've done that, I'll have a look through the comments. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for a fab interview, Jo. Really enjoyed that.
See you soon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.